Assistant Director General of UNESCO in charge of information and communication. And I warmly welcome you all to the workshop co-organized by Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, otherwise known as OECD, and Internet Society, otherwise known as ISOC, and UNESCO, on the economic aspects of local content creation and local internet infrastructure. We will have a presentation of the results of the study, and I believe that the 4-pager, right, Taylor?
Yeah, I don't.
It's not really. Yeah. So we will do a presentation of the study. Then we will have comments and criticism of the results of the study by people who know how internet works, and that is Windsurf and Tarek Kamel. And then, of course, we will be happy to listen also experience from Kenya and Africa on the local content creation. And then, of course, we will be happy to engage in discussion of this issue. But let me give you at the very beginning the background of the study, how we got there. It comes to the IGF meeting in Vilnius, where I had the chance to talk to ISOC and OECD, and agreed that we would conduct a study trying to see whether there is any positive correlation between the volume of local content, which is kept on local internet infrastructure, and the price that local internet users are paying for access. In other words, prove that there is a direct economic interest in promotion of local content production. We assume that at the beginning of our work that the local consumption of the content would be majority local. In other words, for instance, which is very natural, that if we take Latvians or French or Italians, they would first and foremost consult websites and seek information in their respective languages, and that would be local news or news related to their countries or territories. And only after they would seek information broader. That was the first assumption, and I think that it is we can reasonably think that about 80% of all consumption is local. And another assumption was that the local traffic is always cheaper than international traffic, and the quality of local traffic is always better than international traffic, simply because if infrastructure is in place, the pipes are always thicker than the local pipes are always thicker than international pipes. So these were two assumptions at the beginning of the study. We did a data collection from different sources, and we we CCNSO Council of ICANN, through them the registries around the world. We approached global internet players. We also got some information from companies collecting internet data to make this study. So without further delay, I would like now to turn to Taylor Reynolds, who is the chief economist in the economist in OECD, who was the one who made a bulk of analysis of data, and he will present the outcomes of this study. Before joining OECD, Taylor worked at International Telecommunications Union, The World Bank and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration of United States. And Taylor has a PhD in economics from American University in Washington, D.C. So Taylor, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today and to share with you this research that we're very excited about. Let me just make sure the, okay, that comes up. I want to briefly go through this report that we've put together. Yannis has given you a very good overview, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the details of the research that we undertook. First of all, I think we need to come up with a definition of what is local content. And that was something that was quite difficult for us to do as part of this research, because it's not the easiest thing to define. We put it down this way, though. We said that the content that is most important to people is typically in their own language, and it's relevant to the communities in which they live and work. So then we dig down a little deeper and we say these communities may be defined by location, culture, language, religion, ethnicity, or an area of interest, or something else. And we also pointed out that individuals can be a member of multiple communities at a time, and also that these communities will change over time, and people will move in and out of different communities throughout their lifetime. So local content, we've said, is information that is relevant to any of the communities in which these people operate. So I want to start with a picture here, and I just want to let you know that I saved you from seeing a picture of me jumping in a jumping dance with the man in the red in the back. He actually won, and I was not able to jump very high. But this is a picture of some Maasai that we met just the other day. And so I thought, how would we classify some of the communities for the Maasai, for these Maasai men that we met? First of all, we could say they're Kenyan, or they could be Tanzanian. We could say they're Nilotic peoples. They could be a member of that community. They could be classified as Maasai. They could be classified by language, by Ma, Kiswahili, or English. They could be classified by a religion or by common interests. For example, they could have an interest in animal husbandry. And I put this one, Samsung mobile phone users, because I asked one of them about his mobile phone. So this is just to show that there's a lot of communities that people fit into, and local content is the content that's relevant to those communities. So we're very interested in this research because the internet plays such an important role in knowledge. So what we did is we dipped into some of the research on knowledge sharing. And there's 4 stages that have been pointed out. It's creation of knowledge and culture, preservation, the dissemination of that knowledge, and utilization in the community. And you can see I've put down some technologies, some developments in each of these sections. For example, the pen and the pencil were a huge advancement in terms of creation of content. You can see here, though, that the internet actually fits in each one of these 4 categories. So there's internet applications that help with creation, internet helps with storage, internet does hosting to disseminate content, and also for internet access is how people use this content. So to give you an example of how the internet is being used to disseminate local content, this is a man that I've learned about. He operates a site or a podcast called Tectronic Sound. And what he is he was an ordinary student, and he said, I'm really interested in a certain type of music. So he gathered up music that was played by independent artists that submitted it to him, and he built over 120 episodes of podcasts that are 45 minutes each. He's become a very large podcaster out of his own home in the United States, and he happened to grow up in the same area where I did. And it just shows how someone who wouldn't have had this opportunity to become a major music distributor has been able to do this over the internet. So with this research, we were interested in 3 different aspects. We were interested in local content, where we say more local content is good. We're interested in internet infrastructure, where we say more internet connectivity is good. And we're interested in network prices. We want lower prices, and that is good. So the next thing we need to do in terms of the econometrics here is we need to test the relationships between these variables. And but to do that, we have to develop measures of local content, internet development, and access prices. In order to test this empirically, I have to have something that proxies for what local content is. So I wanted to go through the variables that we used in order to measure local content. We divided local content into two different branches. One we said was measurements tied to an economy, and so we used web pages using a country code top-level domain name per 100 inhabitants inside a country. And then we also looked at measurements tied to a unique language. And for this we did number of Wikipedia articles per language per inhabitant and number of published blogs per language per inhabitant. So this allows us to see local content developed for an economy or for a specific language. Next, we move on to measuring infrastructure. And to do this, we used 4 different measures. We did broadband subscriptions. We did the number of autonomous systems per 100,000 inhabitants, which is the number of unique networks. We looked at the number of routed IPv4 addresses per capita. And we looked at international bandwidth capacity per capita as a measure of internet infrastructure. Then finally, for prices, we looked at several different things. For domestic internet prices, we looked at the price for a monthly broadband connection. So how much you would pay to subscribe to broadband in a country. And on the international side, we looked at what is the average price for 155 megabits per second of IP transit. And that would be the full port price. So now I want to move to the results. We have the indicators that we're using to test the relationship, and now we move on to the findings of this research. This is a graphic that shows the relationships that we were able to identify. First of all, let me point out that you have, on the top you have 2 bars, and these are other factors that are demographic. This could be age, educational, geographical, and we have general economic performance on the bottom. Both of these things influence local content, and they influence internet infrastructure. So we have accommodated those within our analysis. Then what we found was a strong relationship between local content and internet infrastructure, and we found also a strong connection between internet infrastructure and internet prices. So Yannis was pointing out, what is the connection between local content and internet prices? Well, what this research shows is that it moves through internet infrastructure as an intermediary. So to point out some of the results that were quite interesting here, our strongest measure of local content was actually the number of Wikipedia entries in a given language. And you've got languages like Arabic, English, Spanish, French that are used in multiple countries. So what we did is we avoided those, and we only used countries that have a unique language associated, for example, Hungarian, Polish, Latvian, and we looked at the relationship there, and we found that there is a strong relationship between broadband penetration, autonomous systems, and international bandwidth. So this gives you an idea of local content measures are correlated with internet development across the board. Then we looked at the relationship between internet and access prices. And in order to do this, because prices are determined within a market, we had to say that international developments in terms of capacity and domestic prices were separate. So you can see that we found a connection between international bandwidth capacity and the price of a broadband subscription at home. So that is an important finding. We also found that internet development locally, so at the domestic level in terms of autonomous systems and broadband penetration rates, are tied to the IP transit price. So this is an interesting finding because it has results that cross over different sectors. So this led us to a round of policy considerations because we see this interconnection between, a couple slides back, between local content, access prices, and internet infrastructure. So we broke it down into 3 specific areas: fostering content development, expanding connectivity, and promoting competition. And for these, we relied on much of the work that's already been done in terms of competition, in terms of connectivity, and in terms of content development. But there's just a couple here that I'd like to point out. For example, liberalizing telecommunication markets is extremely important as a way to promote competition, which we'll have a link back. And fostering content development, one of the things that we pointed out that's extremely important is that governments put public sector data and make it available on the internet. So that's just a quick summary of some of the policy considerations. And thank you very much. Asante sana.
So thank you, Taylor, for this presentation. Now I will turn to David Bickel, Regional Bureau Director for Africa from Internet Society, who was following the work and contributing to the work from ISOC side primarily. Prior joining ISOC, David worked at Addis Ababa University as on teaching and research positions in computer science since 1994. In past 10 years, he worked as a consultant for major international organizations such as United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNESCO, and World Bank. His activities enable him to travel around Africa with a large number of information communication technology professionals of the continent. David is an Ethiopian citizen living in Addis Ababa. He received his undergraduate, master's, and PhD degrees from University Paul Sabatier in France, and a degree in computer science. All degrees are in computer science. And David is based in Ethiopia and worked from there. David, please.
Thank you, Yanis. First of all, I would like to say that the Internet Society is very proud for participating in this very important study with OECD and UNESCO. I believe in a very short time, we have been able to produce interesting results and also be able to find new questions, which is very important in order to further the development of local content in the world. I would like to talk a little bit more about the study and local content in general, and I will try not to repeat a lot of what Taylor has said. I can't agree more about the importance of local content on the internet, because local content is really what makes the internet relevant for most of the population of the world. I was in another session just before this one that talked about how Kenyans have used mobile in order to solve a very particular problem. I think many of you have heard by now M-Pesa, which is a local mobile currency. And it is used by local workers who generally have their families in the rural areas to send money. It started like that. It's now much more than that. But it was really a very local problem. There are the husband is working maybe in Nairobi, and he has his family in the rural areas, and he has to send money on regular basis. And he generally has to find someone, and that was generally very difficult, someone he can trust, who can go there, etc. Now, with M-Pesa, he can do it really without any problem. This is a very local problem, and it cannot be solved otherwise. In a few years back, local content was really very limited on the internet. In fact, internet was considered as a way to look outside, not to look inside. And this was important, of course. There was a wealth of knowledge that we can get from the internet, but it didn't solve many of the local problems. Today, this is changing. Was quite surprised by the wealth of local content that exists in many of the countries that were included in the study. In China, where, in fact, the majority of the people are looking at local content. They are less interested in what is happening outside, sometimes because they are barred to do it, but very often because it is not in the language they understand. It is not about something that they are interested in. Kenya, the same thing. There is more and more content, and not only interesting content, but in the format they want it. Because, for example, most Africans are using are accessing internet through mobile medium. And they are interested only in what they can really see in a reasonable format on their mobile. And unfortunately, most of the content that people in the developed world are producing is not in that format. So it is possible to have local content. Now, something that many people are asking, are local entrepreneurs competitive enough to produce content for the internet? In fact, what we can see is that, in fact, they have a competitive advantage over international content producers because they know what the local people want. They know the local language. And in fact, they have, they can easily win in the competition because they have knowledge that the others don't have. And I think in some years ago, it was thought that the world is flat, that we are all going to read the same news, to access the same content, etc. But what we realize is that, in fact, we are not, in fact, the world is even going to be more local because we see that, for example, English was the predominant language on the internet a few years back. Today, it is not. Today, we have a lot of content in Chinese. We have a lot of content in Swahili. And this is going to be more and more the case. So the world will have more and more local content. And it is going to be to give more and more business opportunity for local entrepreneurs. There are challenges, of course. We see that, for example, the internet penetration is not as high as it should be in some places of the world. In Africa, the penetration is still too low, less than 6%, but not all over Africa. There are countries in Africa that are doing very well. The prices are not always low, but this is changing. Kenya is a very good example. 3 years back, there was no submarine cable landing on the coasts of Kenya. Today, there are 3. And this is going to put down the prices, and it will change a lot of things. Governments are also, we are seeing it, and the study shows it. There are more and more governments that are interested in promoting local content. There are more and more governments that are role models. And infrastructure is also changing. It's not only submarine cables, but local backbones are also increasing. So this is really encouraging. There are a lot of successes and opportunities. I'm going to go quickly because I don't think I have too much time. Yeah, the success of mobile in Africa. Africa has become a mobile continent, not only with regards just to voice, but even with regards to internet access. For example, most people in Africa access broadband using e-video or 3G, and this is going to be the future. And I think, in fact, Africa has found a lot of solutions for its problems with regards to mobile. For example, prepaid has really got a lot of importance in Africa. And now I think the majority of people in Africa are using prepaid, and this is very important. In conclusion, I believe that local content empowers the community. It's only through local content that local communities can get the most of the benefit from the internet, and it is good business. And it is where probably local entrepreneurs can make more business. Governments have major responsibility in promoting local content. We have seen in the study that local content can bring down the prices. I didn't talk a lot about some of the problems that we have, but I'm sure that we are going to have some discussions on that. But the infrastructure is also important. For example, currently, most of the local content is hosted outside the country, and this is some of the problems that we have to solve. And the world is going towards more of local content and not less. Thank you.
So thank you, David, for your thoughts and experiences in Africa. Now I am turning to Mr. Vint Cerf, Chief Internet Evangelist in Google, but widely known as one of the founding fathers of the Internet, the one whom to not to blame but to thank for creating this wonderful tool. Vint is a co-designer of ICP IP protocol and Internet architecture in general. So we send Vint advanced copy of the study, and he is maybe a little bit in a better position than all of you in the room. He knows studying in the details, not only from presentation, and so he will give us his assessment and views on the results. Vint.
Thank you very much, Yanis, and good afternoon. I guess still good morning, everyone. Let me remind you that there are many people who have had a lot to do with the creation of the Internet. The other nominal father of the Internet, Bob Kahn, who started the project, is also on the premises, although not in this meeting. And I even saw Louis Pouzin, who is a pioneer in the whole subject of datagrams, was in a previous meeting in this room, too. So you have a lot of dinosaurs roaming around in this part of the world, in case you hadn't noticed. Let me start out by observing that local content, by the definitions that you've chosen, which I think, by the way, are quite clever and richly chosen, is a clear source of growth of Internet utility. Without local content, the utility of the net is limited by the utility of distant information that might not be relevant, partly because it doesn't have anything to do with the local geographic conditions, business conditions, or it's in a language which isn't accessible. So local content is extremely important, and we've noticed historically that this is how things grew in Europe, for instance, where the Internet began with a lot of content in the United States, a lot of hosting in the United States, and then eventually we saw local infrastructure growing to meet the production of local content. We also saw traffic patterns changing as a consequence of that. For many years, especially between countries, a lot of traffic in Europe, for example, would go to the United States before it got back to the other country. This was because a lot of the connectivity of the net was supplied by connections going between the U.S. and a particular country in Europe. The same thing showed up in Latin America, where a lot of connections went from a Latin American country to Miami and then back again. All of that changed dramatically as more Internet grew in domestic terms, and inter-exchange points were created in order to link local networks. Let me turn to the behavior patterns and local content for a moment. At Google, we've noticed that people query different things, different kinds of things, depending on whether the query is coming from a mobile device or coming from a laptop or a desktop or a notebook. When you are using a mobile, you are interested in information that you need where you happen to be at the time and when you happen to be at the time. So this is demand which is driven by an immediate need, typically. Whereas if you're sitting at a desk somewhere or you're at home, the information you're looking for may have less to do with where you are than what you're interested in. So we see very different patterns of query. We see a lot of interest in maps and understanding where are you now, where can I find things that I'm interested in, what's going on in the local region. So I think it's very appropriate to make a distinction between the information which one gets access to from the mobile and from other devices. The other thing which I believe has distorted the statistics in African uptake of internet is that I don't think that the data that says that, for example, internet penetration is 6%, I don't think it takes into account the number of users of internet who get access only through mobiles. Now, I don't have a strong basis for making the assertion, and if someone else has better information than I do, I would accept the correction. But I would like to suggest to you that there is deeper penetration of internet in Africa than we think, because the people who publish the statistics don't know what fraction of the mobile phones have internet access. My guess is 15 to 20% are smartphones and have internet capability. But I would suggest we should find out. We should ask that question and get data. Just on this subject of data, and something which I applaud this report for having generated and analyzed a substantial collection of data, there's a famous professor in my world whose name is Richard Hemming. And he was famous for having said that the purpose for numbers, the purpose for measurement is not numbers. The purpose for measurement is insight. And that's what this report is trying to do. It's trying to turn the numbers into insight. So I was excited by having real data. I liked the presentation in the report. When you see the charts and the graphs, they're very helpful. They give you a visual sense for the meaning of the information. I have one small nit about one of the data elements. It has to do with statistics that are related to country code TLDs, CCTLDs. And the small nit is that not all of these CCTLDs are used in the same way. Many of them, probably most of them, have registrations that are specific to either individuals or institutions that are in country. But some of them are really being used and are branded as if they were generic top-level domains. So .tv, for example, or .md, or .cc, and more recently .co, have been branded and advertised as useful for generic purposes as opposed to representing local businesses and local users. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the data that is intended to reflect local usage is distorted by the generic usage of some of those top-level domains. I don't think it polluted the results of the report in sufficiently to harm the conclusions at all. But further work on reports like this probably should take this into account. I think the last thing I want to say before we get back into what I hope is a very rich interaction is that the local content has a great importance. Speaking for Yannis here, it has great importance because it can capture culture, it can capture language, it can capture history in ways that no other things can. And it's exciting for me to imagine that the internet will become a repository for our stories on a global scale. There are lots of issues associated with the preservation of digital information. I leave this for another discussion, but it is very important that we have a way of preserving and continuing to get access to this kind of culturally valuable and historically valuable information. Last point I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman, is that at Google we believe that a lot of information is inaccessible simply because it's in a language that we don't speak or don't read. And so we've spent a good deal of time and energy to try to learn how to translate from one language to another. We do this in up to 50 different language pairs. So in theory, there could be 2,500 different translations going from one direction to the other. I will be the first to observe that the quality of the translations varies dramatically depending on the language pair. Our techniques depend very heavily on having a large corpus of documents that are written in at least 2 different languages. And we use the statistical correlation of phrases in order to do translations. Without a large corpus, it's not possible to use the statistical technique very effectively. So I want to encourage as much local content as possible and also some high quality translations of it so that we can ignite the automatic translation engine and make all of the content more accessible to everyone. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for the opportunity to intervene.
Thank you, Vint. Actually, we were trying to avoid deliberately those CCTLDs you mentioned, because, of course, they do not represent in the local content in a direct sense. But what made our work rather difficult was the lack of accessible data in a, let's say, in a time sequence.
Yes.
So we could do a snapshot of 2010, but then when we look back 2009, 8, 7, 5, so the available data diminished dramatically. So that made our work very, very difficult. That means that we simply have to continue and collect data from now on to see these patterns in the future. So now I will turn to Mr. Mariuki Kereti. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Who is the CEO of Summit Strategies Limited, the consultancy company working on ICT consultancy, research, strategy, evaluation, and market profiling. And Mariuki will be sharing with us his thoughts and knowledge about local content creation situation in Kenya and also in other African countries. So, Mariuki, please.
Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Mariuki Mureithi, and as you have heard, I'm in ICT consulting. I'm in the private sector. But I think what brings me here, and I can see a lot of my friends, is I have a lot of passion in the development of ICT. I've been involved in the development of ICT in the African continent for a long time. And so I would like to share some of the experiences in terms of driving or the utility of the internet. And I'd like to go back to about 15 years ago. Things were not very good in Africa. If you look at some of the indicators we had, for example, penetration, we were talking about less than 1 phone for every 100 people. And so there are challenges of being able to use the internet. In fact, by 1996, we had only had internet in 2 countries. One in the north, that's Egypt. One in the south, that's South Africa. The rest of sub-Saharan Africa, what we were talking about was store and forward. In other words, you write your email, you set it to a point there where it will be picked later on and distributed. And some of these would take about 6 hours before the mail is even picked. Yeah, exactly, FidoNet. Thank you very much. And so at that time, there was a lot of also struggle. Are we going to remain like that? So institutions like ITU, UNESCO, UNECA, and also African agencies like AU and ATU came together and established a think tank, that is African Information Society Initiative. I'm one of the members who was appointed in that committee, and the first meeting we held, we did it in Egypt, supported by IDSC in 1996. And so we were asking ourselves for how long Africa was left behind in the Industrial Revolution. Are we also going to be left behind? Okay, we were still behind, but how can we move so that to be in tandem with other countries? And so out of the discussions that took place within the African Information Society, that think tank, we came up with a framework known as the African Information Society Initiative. And the key thing coming out of the IC is, yes, we need infrastructure. It was missing. But more important, that infrastructure must have a purpose, and that purpose is the content. That content was here, is still here, but then, in a way, it is not accessible. In our books, in our stories, all over, but is not accessible. And so, what the IC said is that, came up with a framework, 15-year framework, that by 2010, we are going to have the infrastructure to our houses, to our villages, but most importantly also to be able to deliver the content. And so out of that, recommendations from that, some institutional infrastructure was established. Institutions like UNECA, ITU, and also UNESCO also came up in support of this, plus other agencies like IDRC. And so through that, we have seen countries engaged in that process. So the key thing was all the countries, or 90% of the countries, had monopolies. And those monopolies were government controlled. And so one of the issues that IC tried to support is liberalization, which has been mentioned by Taylor some minutes ago. The intention was we have to open up, bring in other players, and therefore expand the development of ICT infrastructure and also content. So going down the road, we have gone far. We have internet in all the countries in Africa. And, but I think at this point where our challenge is, this internet is largely in our capitals. We still have challenges to take it to the rural areas. But most importantly, content that is relevant to the community in our countries. So when I look at Kenya as an example, some years ago, 10 years ago, we had that challenge. The government was hands off, actually was very, very, did not want to talk about internet. But today, the government is very supportive and very proactive, has been brought in the liberalized, we built in infrastructure, but then the government also realized that there are some areas the private sector is not going on the basis of economics. The government has come in and put in infrastructure, but research is showing that the value of that infrastructure will be enhanced if we can be able to enhance the use value. The studies that we have carried out show the use value of that infrastructure will be enhanced by content, and content that is relevant to our population. So what are we doing now? First, the government is very proactive, supporting infrastructure, supporting strategies on content, and the government has said we are going to be in the forefront. So 3 months ago, the government of Kenya put out all this content on the web, open government, and has even gone further to support entrepreneurs. This content is out there. Can you work on it, develop some applications that will be able to empower Kenyans? And through this process, is even encouraging by competition. The civil society is also involved in developing of content. The private sector, we have also seen some initiatives, but I think as of now, the greatest challenge that we are facing as a country is developing business models, sustainable business models that will produce the content on a sustainable basis and that is available. So this is where we are, and the government has established an agency, Kenya ICT Board, and one of the desks is to support the development of content creation. And as gone further, as I've said, supporting competition and even giving grants for entrepreneurs to develop content. So the challenge we are right now is developing models that will produce content sustainably. Mr. Chairman, I think we'll have a chance to develop that further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maruke, for your presentation and also a little walk back in the history of development of internet here in Africa. It's very interesting. So now I'm turning to Mr. Tarek Kamel, Dr. Tarek Kamel, pioneer of internet in Egypt, former minister of ICTs, in Egypt, in the government of Dr. Nazif, and host of IGF 2009 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Very big friend of the internet and supporter of multi-stakeholder approach towards internet governance from upfront. So, Dr. Kamel, you have floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be participating in this panel, distinguished panel, about the study that has been conducted by OECD, ISOC, and UNESCO. And let me start by really encouraging the work that has been developed within this study, because we have a trilateral team. Every one of them brings its value. The OECD is very well known for analytical economic studies. ISOC is a very well technical founded organization, and UNESCO is very well known for its support for knowledge development and free flow of information worldwide. So having all three players in one study, I think, happens for the first time and is really something that we are very glad of. I will talk about two parts. The first part related to some comments about the study, similar to what Vint has said. I have some comments where I agree with the fact-finding in the studies, but also some comments where I disagree or would like to add in the study in the future. The second part of my comments will focus a little bit more about Egypt, similar to our friend from Kenya has done, enlightening what's going on in Egypt in content development within the last couple of years and where we still lack support. First of all, I definitely agree that fostering connectivity has been an issue, as it has been mentioned by our friend from Kenya during the 90s. Now we have a different challenge. We have a challenge of knowledge gap, knowledge divide, and generational divide. And I think this is by far more comprehensive and more difficult to face than we did as a community face together the challenge of the 90s, connecting Africa and connecting the developing countries and connecting the world. We together in a multi-stakeholder format led by ISOC, by ICANN, by the NGO, by the multi-stakeholder, by the various players, succeeded in doing that. Definitely technology has helped us. The evolution of mobile technology played an excellent role in that. And similar to what Vint has said, I second what he said, that the penetration in Africa would be definitely around 15% and not 6% due to the evolution of mobile. This means that the homework has been partially done concerning the connectivity, but we still have a big challenge to face concerning the knowledge and the knowledge gap. The second point that I wanted to agree upon in this study is the definition of local content. And I see it wonderful from UNESCO really defining local content, because it is very difficult to define local content. Is it the content that is comprehensible to users? Is it the content that is relevant to users? Is it the content that is in the local language? Or is it the content for people in a certain geographical proximity? If we take it from a language point of view, just to give you an overview about the Arab world, we have 350 million Arab-speaking people as a population worldwide, but only maybe 70% live within the Arab region, and 30% live outside the Arab region. Is this local community, or is this not counted as local community? Is this local content, or isn't this local content? And I would agree with the study that this is defined as a local content, because I saw that we have been able to integrate 30% of this Arab-speaking population that are living in the US and Europe and outside within our digital communities and our digital societies. So I see this really as a plus, and we need to work on it. And I also see that it helps the diversity that is being part of the main themes of this conference, and the access to knowledge really, because the definition of access is changing. It's not anymore access, it's just basic connectivity, it's access to knowledge and it's access to information. And the third point where I agree upon in this study is the composition is changing of local content. It used to be only in English. Now we see a change. Arabic is coming on, French is coming on strongly, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and many other African language as well happening more and more. The overall growth is mentioned in the study 40%, but the growth rate, the big growth rate does not come from the English language, but from the other languages. Some of them are up to 60% and 70% and 80%, and definitely Google can second that. I liked also in the study the analysis that has been done about pricing and technology evolution, how the devices are getting more and more affordable from a price point of view, and more capable from a technology point of view, from storage capabilities and from access capabilities, and this definitely helps the whole thing. The last point that I agree with is the infrastructure analysis that has been done. I like that for the first time, at least I see it in the first time in any study, autonomous system and users and IP addresses are being involved in a study. This is really a big plus. And because autonomous systems at the end of the day represent organizations that have their own networks, manage their own networks, and are connected to the rest of the internet, and IP addresses represent individual users that are comprehensive, that are more or less skilled users, and that do have skills to connect to the internet. Both are not only a technical issue, but an economic issue as well, because they reflect definitely growth in the GDP, and I liked in this study that this is related to GDP growth and has been linked to GDP growth. I definitely also support that the local content and internet infrastructure are the foundation for a sustainable economic ecosystem of the 21st century, and we should be really continuing to analyze the relation between local content and internet infrastructure, because, as I said, they are the foundation for a well-developed economic ecosystem worldwide. But as well, I disagree with the following points. It has been mentioned with the autonomous systems that they completely reflect the number of organizations connected into a country. This is not always the case. For example, in Egypt, we have 60 autonomous systems, but by far larger number of organizations connected to the internet. Why? Because many big organizations still use the autonomous systems of their respective ISPs because it is easier for them and more straightforward. Maybe this is not in the government, this is not in the academia, but this is definitely in the business community. I also have a comment about that I disagree about the areas related to the pricing. When it comes to pricing, as it has been mentioned, I still see an international issue that we haven't given as a global community enough attention. The international connectivity is still the bigger proportion of the pricing of the internet access. The local part is quite limited when it comes to be compared with the international connectivity. And my problem has been and is still the case that in connecting the developing countries, they carry the bigger portion of the international connectivity. They pay for the submarine cables that connect them to the US backbone or to the European backbones. And this is why, because most of the content is abroad, and the well-developed backbones are abroad. So they all want to get hooked there. But traffic is in both directions. It imports content to the developing countries and exports content out of the developing countries. But the international cost is being primarily carried still by the developing countries to a great extent, and we need to handle that as an international community. Definitely local internet exchange points help in that and reduce the prices, but it continues to be an issue. I also would like to mention that still most of the traffic in the developing world is still international. In Egypt, for example, although we have local internet exchanges, but 85 to 90% of the traffic still goes international. This means that we are still limited in our local access compared to the international access, and as it has been mentioned, Egypt has been one of the first countries that were connected to the internet in the early 90s. And although we have local top-level domains and images of root servers, top-level domains for the DNS resolution, but most of the traffic is still international, and I think we need to give attention to that more and more in the study. Another point that it hasn't been mentioned in the study thoroughly is line sharing in developing countries. Line sharing in developing countries is happening more and more often, and due to the affordability issue, and it impacts definitely the latency, it impacts the response time, but it happens more and more, and we need to come up with new business models, maybe either to absorb that or to avoid that. But it cannot be left like that in a gray market that is doing more and more the line sharing. This problem does not exist in Europe. I know does not exist in the developed world, but it exists in the developing countries, and it will continue to be a barrier for local content development more and more. I second what Windsurf has said about the CCTLDs. They are really misleading. And again, I will give an example of Egypt. In Egypt, we have 4,000 entries under the CCTLD, the .eg domain. This is a very, very limited number, only to be probably estimated by 2 to 3% of the overall registrations and entries that are being done under .com.org GTLDs worldwide. I don't want to get into the details why this is happening, because of the time that it takes to registration, because of the money, the barriers, and things like that, but this is a fact. So if we link local content to entries under CCTLDs, I think it should be misleading. But I also agree with what the Chairman Yanis has said, that we need to continue to measure the growth, but this is because this is an indication, but not to take it just as a number for itself, absolute number for itself, reflecting the situation of the local content. In Egypt, we were working within the last couple of years on fostering local content more and more. The government has gone aggressively through an e-government program to promote local content via public information. We have developed our own portals, put out information about government services almost for free, and encouraged also service provider to promote the local content more and more. Egypt is very rich in history. We have a very specialized center. Some of you has visited it. It's called CultNet, that is taking care of preserving really the heritage of Egypt, the archaeological heritage of Egypt, and making it online and putting it online and making it available in cooperation with the business community, IBM, and others. We have definitely many manuscripts that are being put online, and we think that this is definitely helping the overall demand. Our challenges are clear. Still, the affordability of PCs is a challenge, and I think this needs to be added to the study. Smartphone helped part of the removing the barrier to access to information, but their prices are still high, and they are only providing the access on a limited basis due to spectrum unavailability and due to high prices. And as Vint has mentioned, they provide the access only based on time and local demand where I am. We have a challenge as well on the language issue. 60% of the population have access to TVs. Why? Because the language is in Arabic. And almost the penetration of mobile now is approaching 100% as well in Egypt. We exceeded 75 million mobile operators. Why? People got the money out of their pocket, again, because there is no language barrier in voice communication. But when it came to the internet, it's only 25%. Why this? Because of the language barrier. Data has language barrier, and still we need to be working on that more and more. Our hope is that video will do the boost, because again, it does not have the language barrier similar to a voice, but it will take some time until this happens really in the developing world on a wider scale. We still have further challenges on capacity building. In the developing world and in Egypt, we have many young people. 60% of our population is under the age of 30. They want to be educated. They want skills. They want analytical skills and access to knowledge. And Egypt is not an exception for that in Africa. It exists similarly in Africa. And I think if we add this point to the study as well, it will enrich the local content development that is based on users and on analytical skills. My My last point is access to social networks. Access to social networks has led in Egypt to political reform via the young people within the last couple of months. But we need to be looking at how can we really utilize social networks and access to social networks in the developing world to foster local content for social reform and for creating jobs and for economic reform. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me this opportunity to make the comment. Thank you.
So thank you, Tarek, and in a sense, you through your intervention, you proved one of the points of the study that, or assumptions of the study, or confirmed on assumptions of the study that international traffic is always more expensive than local traffic. So, and it leads us to the Q&A session or comments, and I recognize Patricia for the question, but I would like to ask one thing to Tarek. You mentioned, and also actually David said first, that a lot of local content in developing world is kept on the infrastructure on servers outside the countries. And you also said that most of Egyptian content still goes through international. What is the reasons and how that can be fixed? Because then the whole traffic would become much more cheaper. And the fact that there is internet exchange point in Egypt, and not the one, but I think even several, still traffic goes outside. How can we fix this issue?
Yeah, I mentioned that in the context of CCTLDs, actually, because and this is what I want to enlighten. Part of the good part of the content is hosted locally, but not under the .eg domain, but under the .com domain and things like that. So the resolution happens, the DNS resolution happens abroad, but the local traffic is there local. But still, we still have a challenge with our ISPs on a sustainable business model to continue to be competitive in hosting content, because with whom are we competing? With giants. And think about cloud computing and what cloud computing will also add, and then we will have all a bigger challenge to sustain our local ISPs when it comes to hosting local content.
Okay, thank you. Patricia?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that you're taking this effort because it's a very important area. I have a few observations maybe that might be helpful. If you, the use of mobile devices with enhanced capabilities, often referred to as smartphones, has been taken off spectacularly in recent years. And in this context, instead of a focus as you have on web and say the measure of the Wikipedia, you might want to look at the vast development of what they call apps. And we've been involved in healthcare apps, and it's an entrepreneurial environment. And in that context, the web you could consider as just another app, albeit an important one, but just another app. Now, why am I mentioning this? Is that if you address app creation, okay, especially to address local needs, identifiable local needs, and usually the young people that are doing the apps, they want to sell them, 99 cents or whatever they put for their app, is that you would have to broaden what you consider content, and my suggestion would be you broaden it to include software as an essential element. Because you really, it's, when you come down to it, we're talking about information expressed in digital forms. Computer knows about zeros and ones. And the management of that information in that form is absorbing a huge amount of time right now to improve how you access this, how you manage it, how you perform operations in a very dynamic way. I also have my favorite quote, Vint, and it's Alan Newell from Carnegie Mellon. He became very interested in copyright and patent several years ago. He's passed away, rest his soul. And he lectured me once that there is no distinction in practice between a computer program and what is data, but that what really matters is the assembled symbolic logic. So now that assembled symbolic logic that's representing perhaps what you're viewing as English or Swahili or what, in order to create that before it's represented in the digital form, you have to have other kinds of languages. And from a UNESCO perspective, fostering education, say in Java and Python, because one of my things is reviewing code. And before the code goes out, you have to look to see what it is, where it came from, and what are you trying to accomplish. Sometimes people are good at writing code, and they don't have the idea about what it is that they want to do. And somebody comes up with a nifty idea, doesn't know how to do code. Sometimes you have to have a team effort. And so I just suggest that that's a whole burgeoning area that you might want to think about.
Yes, thank you. Taylor, please.
Well, Patricia, I've got some very good news for you. So the OECD has an ongoing project on digital content, and our next project between January and June is on apps. So exactly this. We're looking at, we're doing one right now on ebooks, and our next move is on apps, because we do see these as extremely important. I do have to say, we have to thank Google for a lot of the data that we used for this. We've used a lot of Google data. I was looking to see if I could find one of the pieces from the report. Google supplied us, actually YouTube, as part of Google, supplied us with some fascinating data that we cite in the report, where they looked at the amount of content. So if you upload a video to YouTube, that video is counted in the country where you uploaded it. So they're able to tell you this video was uploaded from, for example, France. And then what they can do is they can say, of the views of that content, how many of those are domestic and how many of those are international. And so they provided us data from Europe. And what I was surprised to find is that in most countries in Europe, roughly 50% or more of the videos that are viewed outside of the country where they're uploaded, which is quite interesting. So for these studies on apps, for new indicators, like some of the criticisms of the report were about the data, CCTLDs, we completely agree, and we're looking for new data that we can use to measure local content. That's why we look to partners like Google. We're going to ask you about Android app, country of origin for Android apps.
But what about the notion about, and my bar association years ago got into this too, because when you're looking at content, content is also what you might call software. Would you be looking at that as well?
If we can find a way to measure it, absolutely.
Well, basically, that's what you're looking at. If
Yeah.
you're looking at content, you have to look at how it's represented.
Yeah.
So it's, you know.
Okay, thank you. Let us move to the next questions. I have 3 requests from the floor. I will start with the gentleman on the second row, then Andrew, then Baher, and then you. But please, Baher, come somewhere where you have a microphone, please.
Okay. Thank you,
Please
Chairman.
introduce yourself at the beginning.
Okay, my name is Jameson Olufuye. I'm the Vice Chairman for WITSA. WITSA is the World Information Technology and Services Alliance. I'm responsible for evangelizing ICT in Africa. Well, I'm sorry for coming late. I didn't get the full details of the briefing regard to the statistics. But the point I came in, I had about the penetration being about 6.1%. And Vincent also came in to talk about between 15 and 20%. I have a data link which refers to the work done by WWW Consortium, ITU, and Nielsen Company. And I am thinking perhaps maybe the 6.1 figure is about the penetration when you look at the world in total. The figure we have here is about 11.5% for Africa. That is penetration within Africa. And with regard to the world, it's about 5.6%. That is the penetration in Africa vis-a-vis the whole world is about 5.6%. And if it's looking at Africa itself, about 11.5%. But this is something done around March. So by this time around, perhaps maybe that figure 50% might be more like it. And lastly, since I came late, is it possible to get that presentation? Is there any way I can have access to it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Actually, this is one of the questions which I'm now writing to pass the message to Taylor when we will have it. It was planned that we would have it already for today. There was some technical problems in printing flyer for the study, but we will rectify that very quickly.
It's going up on the internet in the next 10 minutes.
So in next 10 minutes, you will get a flyer. You'll, yeah.
At our site. So I'll put up a link.
Yeah, on OECD site in 10 minutes you will get the four-pager of this one. So then the next will be the publication of the full study, and most probably that will take a couple of months from now, simply to get all necessary clearances, since this will be published by 3 organizations, OECD, ISOC, and UNESCO, and there is some procedure in place. So, Andrew Mack, please.
Thank you very much. One of the big things that, when we talk about local content, one of the big things that we're oftentimes talking about is not the internet as it is today, but the internet as it will be 5 years from now. And if you look at the top 10 languages on the web, 5 of them aren't written in Latin script, right? There are also many communities that have a dual or multi-script identity, right? Look at India, look at North Africa, which uses Latin and French and Arabic script. And for many people, that's an identity that shouldn't be separated, that you use both scripts, you work in both scripts, you live in both scripts. And so one of the things that I think is going to be crucial for us is to try to find ways to promote the non-Latinization or the broadening of the web from its roots in English, frankly, because that's really what it means to get more things online. You look at the question of Pakistan. A great deal of the government of Pakistan's web presence is in English. 10% of the people in Pakistan speak English, 90% speak Urdu, right? The other thing about it is to talk about, is to look at the whole issue of underserved scripts on the web. And it's an issue that I've done a lot of work on recently through the Joint Applicant Support Group at ICANN. And there are a significant number of small scripts on the web, Armenian, Lao, which one of the big concerns is that they will, without a little bit of support, they'll never get built out at all. And then you have what is effectively a choice. Do you have local content and the preservation of local culture and the ability to do business in your own local language, or do you have to give that up in order to become a global net citizen? And I think that that's a big issue, trying to find good ways to promote the diffusion outside of just English and outside of just Latin scripts is really crucial. Thanks.
Thank you. Actually, this was one of the underlying ideas behind the study, to find an ammunition to argue in favor of local content production in different languages, because you can always argue, you need to do that, but who will pay for that? And it is good to be subsidized, but the underlying idea was to see whether there are economic incentives which could be convincing for governments, for private sector, in order to invest in local content production. And that's the point.
Just finish that thought. One of the things that has been bandying around the internet governance community of late has been this idea that you would give people an incentive to build out in multiple languages simultaneously, a bundled approach to pricing, so that in the same way that you might buy a 6-pack of Coca-Cola instead of each bottle individually, so that someone might build out in Arabic, so that someone might build out in Lao or in Azeri and things like that. And that is one of the ways that you could get people who are otherwise not really that interested in doing it, to do it, but in a sustainable way that doesn't require subsidies.
Thank you. Now, Baher Esmat from ICANN.
Thank you, Anis. My name is Baher Esmat. I'm with ICANN. So I have one question and one comment. The question is related to the comment from the gentleman from Kenya about the real challenge of having a sustainable business model for creation of content. And that's I agree, that's a key problem. And my question is whether the study has looked into that issue, has considered and maybe elaborated or looked into what kind of business models could work for the developing countries, other than the most popular model of the online advertisements, for instance, which might not be successful in the developing world. So that is one question. And if the study has not done that already, if that's something that could happen in future versions of the study. The comment I have is in relation to CCTLDs. So as many of you know that many countries started to enjoy and to use their country code top-level domains in their native languages, like Arabic, Chinese, etc., for the past year or so. And currently we have like 30 top-level domains in different languages representing 20 different countries. So maybe one of the things the study might consider in the future is to look into, since it has already looked into the content under CCTLDs, so maybe in the future you might look into the content under IDN CCTLDs, and that could give some indication as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all these comments. They're fascinating, and they're giving us some directions for future work as well that I think are very important. On the issue of CCTLDs, when we did the analysis, the econometric analysis, we had to take out the .nu, the .tv, the .fm, because they're absolute extreme outliers in the analysis. So we censored those out before we ran the regression. So they're not in there. There might be other examples we didn't catch, but I mean, they're so obviously out there that we took them out of the analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. What I can say, Bahir, together with URID, UNESCO this year published first report on IDN CCTLD uptake. And we have agreement with URID that we would, from now on, produce annual world IDN uptake. And the volume of content on these IDN domains would be one of the issues we would be looking at. So thank you for this suggestion. So now I will give the floor to you, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, this is Karen Rose from the Internet Society, and I just wanted to make a comment regarding the statements that international bandwidth capacity is always the highest part of the link. And I think that's a little bit overly general, and I think is being overtaken by a lot of events, especially concerning satellite, undersea fiber capacity. So, for example, particularly in Africa, the cost per megabit of traffic, several years ago could be $1,000 to $3,000 per meg, especially predominantly on satellite. And now with undersea fiber cables, that's down as low as $100 per meg. So what's happening is that you're really seeing, like currently, the buying capacity from Cape Town to Johannesburg in South Africa, or from Dar es Salaam to Arusha in Tanzania, is actually more expensive than buying capacity from either Dar es Salaam or Cape Town all the way to London. So those domestic links are actually multiples more expensive than the international capacity. Further, in some instances in IXPs we've worked with, that for an ISP to get to an IXP in their country, the cost of securing that link to the IXP for the ISP is actually more costly than the traffic that they would save at the IXP in connecting. So I think there's an ecosystem of costs here, and they're quite complicated. Cross-border interconnection is a big issue in Africa. And I think that's really important for, as we think about creating local content ecosystems and the delivery of local content. There's a tremendous amount of potential. Cairo and Egypt is the Hollywood to the Arab world, and Nigeria, I think, is only second to Bollywood in the proliferation and the amount of content that they have. So there's a lot of content out there that's waiting to be digitized. And I think this is an indication that there are a lot of people in countries with skills that can be transferable to the online world. So I think we have to look at the content delivery ecosystem, the costs associated with that, digitizing and getting online the content that's already in place in these countries, as well as harnessing the skills that are already in these regions to provide more local content online.
Thank you, Karen. Tarek?
Just a comment. I agree with you in saying that the charges for international connectivity went down within the last 5 years drastically. If you compare it with the previous satellite channels now with the fiber. This was due to competition, because as it has been mentioned in Kenya, for example, now we have 3 landing points and 3 landing cables, submarine cables that are coming from various 3 players. In Egypt, similar. The flag, the CME, and the local cables now provide competition. That's right. We need on a local level as well to continue to foster deregulation and to foster more competition in order to bring the prices more and more down, or policies from the government to subsidize the local support because it fosters content. But still the point remains, and this is where I disagree, that the international proportion is being carried by the developing countries. Although it is coming now lower, but it is primarily carried by the developing countries. If Kenya wants to connect via the submarine cable to the UK to a landing point or an internet exchange points in the UK, probably the Kenyan ISPs pay for most of the cost of the link. In the classical telecommunication services in the past, it was bidirectional. It was carried by both players. But now one single player is carrying it, although it is being utilized in both direction. You send me an email, I send you an email, but I pay for your email that you send to me as well for the international proportion part. And this needs to be some analysis.
I'd love to talk to you
Karen.
further offline. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now, certainly that, as I said at the beginning, we made some assumptions as a starting point. Of course, that it might be that local traffic is more expensive than international, but as Tarek said, there might be also regulatory issues. There might be infrastructural issues, and but in let's say in theory and in general, and once again, as I said, we thought that the study would give us a lot of arguments in favor of local content creation. So maybe I will take one more question from Stefano Trumpi, and then I will give floor to all those who want to say something from panelists. Stefano.
Very quick observation and question. I was really intrigued by the definition of local content, and I have to make this observation. 20 years ago, I started a UNESCO project, Regional Informatics Network in Africa. And I remember at the time that I had an evaluation that 90% of the content on Africa was residing in Europe, everywhere in the world, and only 10%. And at the time, the connection that we established were with the modems 2,400 bits per second, not useful for any transmission of content. Now you have the chance and to do something very completely different. And in my opinion, the effort to produce, let's say, a new local content that is useful for economics, that is useful for societal cohesion and things like that. And then, of course, this all the 90% of the content that was residing in other continents then may be also retrieved and may be translated into other local languages, as we were saying. I think that this is a possibility of doing something very new, and the effort to produce new local content is essential. Thank you.
So thank you, Stefano. Now I will turn to Moriuki for comment.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to refer to the comment from the gentleman from ICANN about the issue of a business model, and specifically whether it is in the report. I'm actually a substitute, so I came in the last minute, so I'm not quite sure what is in the report, but I was given the experience of Kenya and Africa in the development of content. I want to reiterate that I've been involved in a number of studies. One of them we did with the AFRISPA, African ISP Association, and they were as concerned as what that gentleman has said. All this content on Africa is based out of Africa. How can we bring it back? What will be the models to bring it back? And so there's a good study which perhaps I can share with you, which I was responsible for driving. We have also worked with the IDLC, International Development Research Center, USAID, our own government here in Kenya. And some of the things that we did was what we call a needs analysis. So we will really go to the rural village and really define what content do these people want. And after going loud, one of the things that came out is they need basic economic information. They need to know where they can sell their stuff, where they can buy them. They need social information. They also need to do interaction to know what is happening around in my neighborhood. They also need information about the government, governance, where they will get licenses, authorization, birth certificates, so forth. They also need opportunity in terms of jobs, so forth. But also, they also need entertainment. Now, some of the areas are easily lending themselves to very good models, for example, in areas of entertainment. But there are others that needs a kick by another agency for them to be developed. And so every time we look at it, how can we have a mechanism to generate this content that is of interest to this local community? We came up with a number of models, but those models always require an agent to be in between. So many of them were driven by the civil society, but one of the things we are finding is that at the end of the day, somebody must pay. At the end of the day, somebody must contribute to this process. And so that's why we are trying to create that link. A business model that's sustainable, somebody pays, somebody gets the value, and it flows. And this is the issue that I hope that this study will, when looking at perhaps our case in Africa, to try to address some framework that is sustainable and will be able to collect that information for use by the local community. Thank you.
Thank you. Heng Kong, you had somebody's come in from the remote, or no?
Sorry, there's no remote, but also for me, I have a question before all the panelists to feedback. You know that I'm thinking about the future of the Africa's local content creation, because now the whole internet is carried away by the cloud computing, which means everybody is creating content which is stored in faraway data center, maybe built by Google, by Facebook, and so what do you think of the role of the role of cloud computing, positively or negatively, in longer term on the local content production in Africa, in developing world? And also I want to know about the African government's attitude. What do you think of the future? Would you think that not only to use the cloud computing outside, but also you think that the national capacity building of the data center, data server to storage, create your data locally stored and preserved? Do you think it's also an important issue for you to consider in your strategy?
So thank you, Hong Kong. I think that this is a theme for the next workshop. Cloud computing. Yeah, I will give now a possibility for the concluding remarks for all speakers here. So let me start with David.
Thank you. I would like to comment on some of the questions and comments that have been given from the floor. First, maybe on what Andrew said about the importance of enabling non-Latin scripts. I think that was a major problem a few years back, and thanks to a lot of organizations and especially UNESCO that has supported the development of, for example, of encoding of non-Latin scripts and the Unicode. The development of Unicode, this problem is becoming less and less important, and I think we should not concentrate on that. I don't think that that is where we should focalize. It is really developing the content itself than encoding it that is currently a big problem. So that is something that I would like to say. Hosting outside Africa, there are various reasons. If I take some countries like mine, for example, the issue of lack of infrastructure is probably what comes to mind. If you don't have reliable electricity, it's very difficult to host in a country where the server might be down 50% of the time. So you prefer to host it somewhere where you can rely on power. Redundancy of connectivity. There are some countries where if one fiber is cut, then you don't have internet for the whole week. And you don't want to host in such a place. So there are many reasons why people prefer to host outside. And one of the reasons is because maybe it is faster to host it outside, even for the local people. If there is no IXP in that country, then someone from another who is using another ISP will have to go outside anyway to access your content. So in fact, it's easier to host it outside where there is better bandwidth. So there are quite a number of issues, and I believe that government should really think seriously, because currently Africans especially are paying a lot of money to look at their own content outside their country. With regards to the price of internet, I have to say that I agree with both of you, Tarek and Karen. Yes, the international connectivity, the price of international connection is going down, but local governments are not doing enough to increase competition, and the price of local connections are not going down enough, and I think that should be a concern of our politicians, and I hope that ministers who are gathering at this meeting are taking this issue. I mean, not this one, but the ministerial are taking this very seriously. And another point is that, in fact, Africans are not doing enough to peer. African ISPs are not doing enough to peer among themselves. It's true that when they are peering in London, when they are connecting in London, they are using transit and they are paying for the transit. But there are things that they can do, and Internet Society is having an annual forum on interconnection in order to increase more and more peering within Africa. And this way, we are becoming big mass of interconnected people that big ISPs around the world will really consider seriously and will peer freely rather than using transit. Thank you.
So thank you, David. Vint?
So let me just be very brief. First of all, with regard to technologies like cloud computing, they simply are driven by economics. And so the economics of scale in a cloud-based system, for us anyway, is the only way to achieve the capacities that we're able to put on the table. I think that that's a trend over time, and that the same kinds of technologies will become useful and accessible in country. One thing I would suggest along the lines of the peering comment is aggregation of capability by a number of different parties might be useful. For example, if a number of different ISPs, other institutions, and maybe even countries decided to fund the development of data centers, or even a data center, so that it's regionally available, might make economic sense. It's still the point about reliability is critical. But I can see a confluence of interests joining together to achieve the economy of scale and pricing that you wouldn't be able to get if everyone had to build their own facilities. So let me leave it at that and say that there's lots of work for the next meeting coming up.
So thank you, Vint, for your final comments. Tarek, now your turn.
I will also be brief, but I will get back to the point of the younger people and the younger generations in the developing world. Egypt is not an exception while saying that 60% of our population is under the age of 30, and this is really the fuel of our future. And this is really the demand, the market. And we have two options when it comes to local content and young people. Either we let them to become global net citizens with all the advantages, but the disadvantages of having identity loss, or we help them really to foster development of local content. I liked what Patricia has mentioned concerning entrepreneurs and the development of apps. We need maybe to think about competitions for these people, awards for these people, providing them with incentives in order to develop local content and distribute it the same way they did it successfully in other things. This will create jobs and will create value and will link them to the local communities as well, and will preserve their cultural and their languages. Maybe that's something for the UNESCO to think about. Thank you.
So thank you, Tarek. And now I will turn to Taylor.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to quickly call your attention to the websites up here. I want you to think in terms of our CCTLDs. We're giving some extra points to Congo Kinshasa here with the .cd, but so we're using our CCTLD outside for shortening our OECD links. The actual, I think it's about a 6-page summary of our main finding and conclusions is listed under oe.cd/local content. And there's a lot of information in there. I think the final thing I just want to say is we were very happy with this research because it shed light on an important issue, and that is that policymakers can no longer think about just these sectors separately. You can't think about content development without thinking about the internet and without thinking about access prices. So I think the main takeaway for the OECD group is that we need to start focusing on having policymakers in different areas speak to each other because the internet connects us all and is this wonderful platform. So thank you.
So thank you. And I would like now to put on record UNESCO's gratitude to OECD and ISOC for collaboration in the framework of this project. This was exemplary. So we're looking forward to concluding and printing this or publishing this study. So thank you to all speakers for being present and sharing your views about study and experiences in the region. Thank you all participants who took time to listen to us, and so looking forward to further engagement. Thank you very much indeed.